On my birthday, Anthony Phipps was meant to call Eleanor, but instead he mistakenly dialed my number. On the other end, he said, Eleanor Clark, I've agreed to marry you, but on the wedding day, you must make sure Jessica doesn't find out. She's my line in the sand. The Jessica he was referring to was me, and Eleanor was his fiancée. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stop myself from crying as he spoke at length, and then he paused, his voice softening slightly. I'll see you at the cafe tonight. Don't forget the banana-flavored condoms, he said before hanging up. I snapped to full awareness. When Anthony married Eleanor, he cut off all communication with me, ordering me to stay home and wait for him. But when he saw the villa empty with no sign of me, he went wild. As soon as the call ended, Anthony returned, holding a bouquet of 999 roses, a habit he'd kept for 7 years. Anna, the nanny, burst into laughter when she saw us. Jessica, it's your birthday today, and Mr. Phipps had 999 fireworks launched in Los Angeles just for you. Everyone's envious of how much your boyfriend loves you, she said. I gave a half-hearted nod, but Anthony, always perceptive, noticed something was off. And what's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? He asked. No, just a little tired. Hearing this, he smiled faintly and asked Anna to bring me some medicine. He claimed it was a special remedy he had gotten from outside, designed specifically to treat fatigue. I had been with him for 7 years and had taken this remedy for 6, but as I looked at the water he handed me, I felt a wave of nausea. Anthony noticed my hesitation and narrowed his eyes, but eventually I drank it. After I finished, he smiled in satisfaction. After dinner, Anthony suggested I take a bath. As a man known for his business reputation, he patiently dried my hair and helped me with the bath. Once everything was done, he gently picked me up and laid me down in bed, holding me close as he fell asleep. About half an hour later, Anthony quietly slipped out of bed, and as soon as he was gone, I opened my eyes. I had secretly spit out the medicine. The room wasn't soundproof, and I could clearly hear the conversation between Anthony and Anna in the hallway. How much medicine did you give her today? Why is she taking so long to fall asleep? Anthony asked. Anna nervously responded, I only gave her 1 pill. There was a sharp edge to Anthony's voice when he said, Next time, give her 2 pills. That way Jessica won't be able to leave me, but if she takes too many sleeping pills, it could make her lose her mind. However, Anthony seemed impatient and didn't catch Anna's next words. After he left, Anna spat on the floor outside my room, cursing, Do you really think that's a high-class drug, you idiot? It's just saline mixed with sleeping pills. Drink enough of it, and next time, add more sleeping pills to make sure she doesn't wake up. Her words hit me like cold water, and I immediately felt a chill spread through me. All these years, I had been kept in the dark. No wonder I had grown so dependent on the pills and why my body had become so weak. Once Anna left, I quietly opened the door, but froze as I stepped outside. They were right next door in the room next to mine having sex. The sounds of the bed creaking and their moans filled the villa. I told you to buy banana-flavored condoms. Why didn't you? Eleanor's voice sounded stunned. Before she could say anything else, Anthony interrupted. Forget it. After this, just make sure you take the morning after pill. Eleanor clung to him without any shame. We're getting married anyway. What's wrong with having your child? Anthony gave her a firm warning. I can give you all the fame and fortune you want, but the child will only come from Jessica's womb. My love belongs to her, and only her. Eleanor immediately went quiet, and their shameless actions resumed. During their intimacy, Anthony let out a low growl. That scarf Jessica made for me with her own hands. Don't you dare ruin it. The next morning, Anthony acted as though nothing had happened, and I stayed silent. As we sat down for breakfast, I suddenly received a call from the hospital. My father, Benjamin, had suffered severe kidney failure and collapsed. I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door. Anthony's expression darkened, clearly aware of what was going on. He sped through 2 red lights and drove us to the largest hospital in Los Angeles. When we arrived, my father had just been brought out of the emergency room, and after hearing the doctors say he was stable, I collapsed in relief. However, Benjamin was still unconscious. As he remained in a coma, Anthony put aside all his work to stay with me, waiting for him to wake up. Finally, Benjamin stirred. The first thing he did when he woke was to beat his chest frantically. Jessica, it's all my fault. I'm a burden to you. Tears flooded my eyes as I cried, but Anthony quickly intervened, gently grabbing Benjamin's hands. Benjamin, You're not a burden. Just focus on getting better. I'm Jessica's boyfriend, and I'll do everything I can to take care of both of you." At his words, Benjamin gave Anthony a deep, silent look. Anthony withdrew his hand without showing any emotion, muttering that it was only natural for him to do so. Just then, Anthony's phone rang, and he excused himself, saying he had work to attend to before leaving the room. I squinted, knowing that work was just an excuse. I was well aware of what Anthony was really up to. Every time he touched a part of Benjamin's body, he would claim it was due to urgent work. When I eventually found him, Anthony was washing his hands desperately, as if trying to scrub the skin off. The nurse nearby, clearly uncomfortable, asked him, "Did you get something on your hands? You've used up an entire bottle of soap and sanitizer." Anthony's disgust was obvious as he replied, "Something dirty." Those two words lodged themselves deeply in my heart. After Anthony left, Benjamin looked at me with pity. "Jessica, I'm a man too, and I know exactly how Anthony feels about you. Don't try to please other men because of me. If you're going to do that, I might as well die," he said. When Anthony first fell for me, he knew I couldn't pay my father's medical bills. He offered the money, but only under one condition. I had to stay by his side. At first, I agreed for the sake of the money, but over time, it became impossible to distinguish where the money ended and the love began. The truth was, Benjamin knew everything. My eyes were red and swollen from crying, but I nodded repeatedly. "I've already made up my mind," I reassured Benjamin. I stayed in the room for a while, and only after some time did I step out. Coincidentally, Anthony had just come out of the bathroom, his hands swollen and red, dripping with water. When he saw me, he instinctively hid his hands behind his back. "I touched some trash, so I had to wash my hands," he casually explained. I nodded, my expression unreadable. "Let's go." That night, Anthony and I lay in bed, his eyes tracing the contours of my face with quiet intensity. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Jessica, you must know Eleanor Clark, right? She's the woman my family chose for me to marry. There might be some intimate contact between us later on, but it's all for necessity. Please don't take it the wrong way," he said. He paused, then added, "If I don't marry her, my company will collapse, and Benjamin's medical bills won't be covered." His eyes searched my expression, looking for a reaction. Everyone in Los Angeles knew the Phipps family was one of the wealthiest and most influential in business. There was no way his company would fall apart just because of a marriage. He thought I was naive and tried to manipulate and threaten me into submission. But I was already ready to leave. Even if he married Eleanor, it didn't matter to me anymore. When Anthony saw my response, he seemed genuinely moved. "Jessica, you're so kind. With Eleanor, it's just a game. Marriage is just something we say for show. Don't worry, the position of fiancé will always be yours." With that, he pulled me into a tight embrace as if trying to merge with me. The next morning, at the breakfast table, I saw the newspaper headline. The bold title read, "In 7 days, Phiper Anthony will marry Eleanor. 999 fireworks to be launched in Los Angeles to make her happy." So, the fireworks hadn't been for me after all. Before I could fully process it, Anthony quickly snatched the newspaper from my hands. "Jessica, what did you see?" he asked. I shook my head, and seeing my denial, he let out a quiet sigh of relief. He then called for Anna, angrily throwing the paper at her. "Filth like this doesn't belong in my villa. You're asking for trouble if you let this happen again." Anna took the paper outside and burned it, but before she left, I heard her mutter, "Living like this, not knowing anything. Might as well die and stop ruining others." On the 5th day before the wedding, Eleanor confidently opened the villa door with a set of keys. Anna was absent, and Anthony and I were in the master bedroom, about to sleep. But outside, I heard Eleanor's sweet voice calling out to Anthony. He immediately panicked, grabbing my arm and nervously looking at me. "Jessica, Eleanor doesn't know about you. You have to hide. If she sees you, she'll cut off all ties with my company." With that, he shoved me into the closet. "Jessica, don't make a sound. Just know everything I do is for necessity." As soon as the bedroom door opened, Eleanor entered and, seeing Anthony, affectionately bit his ear. "Anthony, did you miss me?" Anthony looked at the closet nervously. But as Eleanor began to undress, he dropped all pretense and forgot about me completely. He eagerly kissed every inch of her skin. Through the crack in the closet door, I watched, the sounds of their pleasure filling the room. After they finished, Anthony, crying, held me tightly and said he loved only me. 3 days before the wedding, Eleanor requested to meet with me. She looked at me with a scornful expression. You saw everything that day, didn't you? You don't really think it was me forcing Anthony, do you?" She laughed maliciously. "But the truth is, Anthony was the one who asked me. He said doing it in front of you would make it more exciting." At her words, I felt no surprise at all. Perhaps I had already seen through Anthony. "I've known about your existence for a while now," Eleanor said coolly. "But I don't blame Anthony. All men are like this. Anyway, I'm about to marry Anthony. If you know what's good for you, you'll stop clinging to him." She then slid a card across the table toward me. "Anthony's used you for years. The card has 1 million on it. Consider it payment for your services." Her tone was filled with condescension, as if she were doing me a great favor. Without hesitation, I grabbed the card and slammed my cup of coffee into her face. The next day, the countdown to the wedding continued. But I received the news from the hospital that my father had passed away. He had removed his own breathing tube and left me with a final message. "Jessica, I don't want to be the threat that chains you down. I just want you to be happy, to live your own life." I was utterly heartbroken, but Anthony insisted that I wait before going to the hospital to claim the body. He told me there was a relative's wedding tomorrow, and he didn't want my father's death to cast a shadow over the celebration. Anthony secured all the details about his marriage and even changed the villa's lock codes, ensuring no one could sneak in. As usual, he kissed my forehead and said, "Jessica, stay here and wait for me to return." I nodded, but the moment he left, I made the firm choice to leave the villa I had called home for 7 years. As Anthony stood at the church preparing to exchange vows, Anna suddenly burst into the scene, stumbling as she yelled, "Miss Jessica is gone!" Anthony froze, his body tensing, and the bouquet of flowers he was holding fell from his hands in shock. He stormed over to Anna, gripping her neck tightly, his eyes wide with fury. "What did you say? Say it again." Anna had never seen Anthony like this before. She trembled, her voice shaking as she managed to get out, "Miss Jessica ran away." By the time she finished, her pants were soaked with sweat. The wedding was a high-profile event, attended by guests from 2 prestigious families, each known for their influence in their respective fields. The banquet hall was filled with confused people, but what lingered in the air was a faint, unpleasant odor that caused everyone to wrinkle their noses. None of them had ever encountered such a foul smell. Trying to remain composed, the family leaders began questioning the situation. "What's happening? Is the wedding still going to proceed?" Eleanor's father, Howard, said nothing, but he fixed his gaze on Anthony, his cane striking the floor with a loud thud, silently demanding an explanation. Brian, Anthony's father, flushed with anger, pointed at Anthony. "Anthony, do you see the mess you've caused?" Brian had always refrained from getting involved in his son's affairs, thinking Anthony was a smart and reasonable man, although he knew his son had a thing for women. As long as it was kept private, he had let it slide. What Brian failed to understand was how serious my disappearance was to Anthony. Anthony felt like he was on the verge of losing his mind. The world around him seemed to go silent. All he could think about was finding me. That's exactly what he did. But at that moment, Eleanor clung to his clothes, preventing him from leaving. "Anthony," she cried, "you're really going to leave me for that woman? If you do, even with your powerful family, I can bring disgrace to your name." Eleanor bit her lip, draining every last bit of her pride. But despite her plea, Anthony wrenched himself free of her grasp without hesitation, stripping off his clothes and tossing them to the floor. He stared coldly at her and said, "I've told you before, Jessica is my bottom line." Without another word, he ran out the door, leaving Eleanor humiliated, standing awkwardly in front of everyone. She collapsed to the floor, eyes red with fury, her hands twisted together. Through clenched teeth, she muttered, "Jessica, we'll see about that." As for the wedding, I knew nothing of it. My escape from the villa had gone smoothly thanks to Anna's greed. Despite Anthony changing the locks, I managed to get the new code from Anna. She had drugged me countless times before, and this time I used several packets of sleeping pills hidden in a dish of black truffles. Anna had never seen anything like it, and when she realized I was offering it to her, she eagerly took it, swallowing it all at once. Before she could even thank me, her stomach churned. Without a second thought, she rushed to the bathroom. Let's just say Anthony trusted her too much and was overly confident in my devotion to him. As a result, I walked out of the villa without anyone stopping me. I went straight to the hospital to visit my father. What remained of him was a pile of ashes, too fragile to even hold in my hands. I cried and laughed as I held the urn, laughing at Benjamin's foolishness for never realizing I had already made the decision to leave Anthony for good. He wasn't the one holding me captive. But I also cried for the words I never spoke to him, for letting him believe he was a burden. I cried for a whole day and night, my eyes swollen from tears. At night, I thought of many things. Since Benjamin had wanted me to be happy and live my own life, I would do just that. I would pick up the dreams I had before meeting Anthony. Before I met him, I was a volunteer doctor. I had planned to go to war-torn countries to offer aid, but my plans were put on hold when Benjamin was diagnosed with kidney cancer. After that, I became Anthony's prisoner, trapped in his villa as his lover. Now, I had bought a plane ticket to Tennessee to help impoverished children. My youth had been wasted on Anthony, but it didn't matter. I could still help children write their own stories of hope. Just before I was about to check out, my phone alerted me to a shocking headline. It was the live broadcast of Anthony and Eleanor's wedding. Seeing Anthony's enraged face and his determination to go through with the ceremony filled me with nothing but disgust. I turned off the notification and was about to power down my phone when Anthony's call came through. His voice was frantic. "Jessica, I called you so many times yesterday. Why didn't you answer?" I replied calmly. "Oh, I went to the hospital and arranged the funeral for my dad." At my words, Anthony on the other end of the line sighed in relief. For a moment, he was stunned into silence. Then his voice trembled, as if trying to regain control of the situation. "So you're saying you already knew everything?" I could feel his unease through the phone, his tone defensive, as if trying to salvage whatever little dignity he had left. "Look, it's not like that. I don't have feelings for Eleanor. You've seen the news, right? As soon as I found out about you, I ran out of the wedding to find you." I didn't respond right away, letting the weight of his words linger between us. He continued, "I realize now I shouldn't have lied to you, kept things from you. But you've arranged the funeral, so don't keep me waiting. Come back soon. I made dinner. I waited for you, my voice as emotionless as ever. When I return, you're not planning to stay married to Eleanor, are you?" There was a long pause on the other end before Anthony spoke, his words heavy with excuses. "Jessica, you don't understand. Eleanor and I share a deep bond, and there are many business dealings between our families. If I sever ties with her, her family will become a significant threat to mine. My family is everything to me, and I can't jeopardize it for a personal matter." I wasn't surprised. This was the same speech I had heard countless times before. The same justification, the same logic Anthony had been using to keep me in line, thinking he could control me with promises of love, family, and security. I stayed silent for a while, and Anthony grew anxious, his words coming out in a rush. "Jessica, can you understand where I'm coming from? Please understand, it's not what you think. Just come back, okay? I've already fired Anna. She wasn't doing her job properly." When he mentioned Anna, my voice grew even colder. I think Anna did her job perfectly. Like a dog, she followed every order, drugging me for 6 years, watching over me on the day of your wedding, to make sure I couldn't escape. The moment I said this, I could hear the panic rising in his voice. "No, Jessica, that's not it. I only made her give you the medicine because I was worried you weren't sleeping well." I couldn't take it anymore. His words were nothing but lies and feeble excuses. I interrupted him sharply. "No, Anthony. I'm done pretending I don't see through you. You're exhausting." The words poured out, and I felt like I was finally tearing down his false persona piece by piece. I didn't have trouble sleeping. You drugged me so I wouldn't disturb you and Eleanor while you were making love. Stop pretending you're trapped in a marriage for family reasons when you're just seeking thrills, using pathetic excuses to play games with me. There was a bitter laugh in my voice as I continued. "Is that it, Anthony? Your sick little thrill? You enjoyed using me as your personal plaything while I had to watch you with her, disgusted by the whole thing." I wasn't finished yet. "Did you know your dick is so small it's practically the size of your nose?" I blurted it all out in one breath, the harshness of my words, leaving me feeling both drained and, strangely, liberated. On the other end of the line, Anthony had no response. There was nothing he could say because everything I spoke was the truth. He had no defense, no justification. I could hear the desperation in his voice as he continued calling me, but I felt nothing but indifference. "Jessica, where are you now? Stop throwing a tantrum and come back. If you want, come back. At least tell me where you are. I miss you. Let me come to you." Then came the words I had been expecting, the final, pitiful attempt. "I'm not marrying Eleanor anymore. Is that enough? Come back. I'm begging you. It was almost laughable, how he thought he could reel me back into his web with empty promises. I had already made up my mind, and no amount of pleading would change that. I didn't respond to him. I just turned off my phone and let it rest in my bag. I was done with the lies, the manipulation, and the chains he tried to bind me with. As the days passed in Tennessee, my resolve grew stronger. The air here was fresh. The people were kind, and the work was fulfilling. I finally found a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The moment I landed, I was welcomed by the warmth of the local community, their kindness overwhelming. They brought me food, medicine, and local delicacies, things I had never expected to experience, but all with smiles and open arms. The warm meals they served felt like a balm for my heart, and soon the cold I had caught began to subside. As I worked with the children and patients, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: purpose. This was where I belonged, in a place where I could truly make a difference, free from Anthony's shadow. I brought Benjamin's ashes with me, hoping he could see that I was living the life he had always wanted for me, a life that was free, happy, and meaningful. There were moments when I would stand by the window of the small clinic, gazing out at the vast mountains and the colorful flowers swaying in the breeze. The thoughts that had once plagued me, the doubts and fears, began to unravel. I no longer felt tethered to a past I didn't want, a past filled with lies, manipulation, and empty promises. I had found my own path, and it felt right. The messages from Anthony kept flooding in, like a constant reminder of the person I had left behind. But I refused to give in. I refused to let his words pull me back into his twisted world. Jessica, you can't just leave without saying anything. Where are you? I need to know where you are. Please don't leave me like this. I don't want to lose you. When I saw that message, I sneered quietly to myself and immediately blocked every single one of his contacts. But what I hadn't expected was that Anthony, relentless as ever, had dragged Tennessee into this. One day, while I was taking care of a patient, we were talking when suddenly the patient fell silent and pointed to the window. Jessica, who is that? They asked. Following their gaze, I looked outside and, to my horror, saw Anthony standing by the window, grinning like an idiot in my direction. My face immediately hardened. I finished tending to the patient with a soft smile, then quickly stepped outside. I pulled Anthony aside and lowered my voice, anger simmering beneath it. What are you doing here? But Anthony seemed oblivious, as if he hadn't heard me, and kept rambling on about his grievances. Jessica, do you have any idea how long I've been looking for you? I begged so many people, even knelt before the airline staff, asking them to tell me where you were. I lost all my dignity, but the moment I saw you again, it felt worth it. His words were filled with emotional longing, but all they did was make my stomach churn. I cut him off sharply, my tone as cold as ice. Are you done? Why don't you go back and get married and stop hanging around me? I jerked his hand away from mine forcefully and quickly wiped my hand with the handkerchief I always carry. Anthony watched me, his eyes filled with hurt, as though every action I took was a personal assault on his emotions. His voice broke. Jessica, don't do this. It really hurts. I raised an eyebrow, unmoved. This hurts? Well, how about when you grabbed Benjamin's hand and scrubbed it so hard that the skin nearly came off? Do you have any idea what Benjamin thought about that? And what about the first time my father cooked for you, to thank you for taking care of us? How did you respond? You immediately spit everything you ate into the trash. Do you know what I thought then? With each word, Anthony's face grew paler and paler. He was speechless. You know, Anthony, deep down, you've always looked down on me and where I come from. But the truth is, I've never respected you either. So let's just end this. Let's put an end to it. I didn't want to say another word or have any further connection with him. But when Anthony saw me turning to leave, he quickly grabbed my arm. Jessica, if my parents find out I married you, they'll never forgive you. I'm doing this to protect you. I was beyond tired of hearing the same excuse over and over. Seeing the impatience on my face, Anthony seemed to make up his mind. With all the courage he could muster, he blurted out, "Then how about I marry you? Is that okay?" I looked at him, pretending he was sacrificing so much, and couldn't help but laugh sarcastically. Slowly, I wiped the smile from my face and stared at him coldly. Let me make something clear, Anthony. Even if you kneeled in front of me and begged me to marry you, I wouldn't agree. I have work to do, so Stop bothering me with this. I turned to walk away, but Anthony grabbed my hand firmly, refusing to let go. I could feel his grip and the strength difference between us, making it impossible for me to break free. Let go, I said, my voice sharp as ice. Yet Anthony still wouldn't release me. Just then, the children, who should have been outside, suddenly rushed over and surrounded Anthony in a tight circle. They were small and couldn't win in a physical confrontation, so they found another way. The kids jumped on him, biting his clothes. Anthony yelped in pain, immediately releasing my hand, but the children didn't stop. They kept biting him. Enraged, Anthony glared at them, raising his hand as if to slap one of them. The moment his hand began to swing, I pulled out my phone. Anthony, if you dare lay a hand on these children, I'll call the police. At my warning, Anthony froze, his hand suspended in the air. I quickly rushed to the children, pulling them behind me and shielding them. Anthony stood there, his eyes filled with tears, looking like he had just been struck. Jessica, is this how you're going to treat me now? He asked, his voice trembling. Without hesitation, I responded, yes, right now you mean nothing to me. Not even as important as the patients I treat. His face went blank, frozen in shock. I didn't wait for him to answer. I turned and walked away with the kids. I thought my words would make Anthony back off, but I didn't expect him to come back even more determined. Soon after, he became a volunteer doctor. It didn't take much to figure out that he had used his influence to get there. Once we became colleagues, he still tried to push himself into my space, proudly approaching me. Jessica, now I can work alongside you. I want you to see how determined I am. Honestly, I was baffled. Here was Anthony, a CEO who could be running a business. Yet he seemed content to spend his days here with sick children. The children, upon seeing the new doctor, didn't even try to hide their dislike. I don't want this bad uncle to take care of us, one of them cried. Before long, tears started flowing down their faces. Anthony stood there, visibly frustrated by the situation. In the end, it was the head doctor who had to send him away. Even as the head doctor, Anthony had to yield some face. Before he left, he shot a venomous glare at the children. Once he was gone, the kids cheered, proudly coming to me as if they had chased the bad guy away. I laughed and scolded them for being little troublemakers. After that, Anthony was banned from interacting with the children and spent all his time holed up in the hospital dormitory. He came from a wealthy family and had never known true hardship. The environment here was tough, even for someone like him. Anthony's fever quickly worsened, and soon he was struggling to breathe, needing to be rushed to the hospital. Lying in a bed, he looked like he was on the edge of death. Since we were all part of the volunteer group, the leader suggested all the doctors visit him in the hospital. I couldn't exactly refuse, so I went. When I arrived, I saw him lying there, pale as a ghost. While everyone else offered their sympathy, I couldn't help but mock him instead. Why bother? Anthony's face, already drained of color, grew even dimmer. His voice was barely a whisper. Jessica, what do I need to do for you to forgive me? I responded without a second thought, my words sharp as a knife. No matter what you do, I will never forgive you. My words seemed to strike him like a bloody arrow, and for a long moment he was silent. Slowly, he reached into his clothes and pulled out a ring, placing it in my hand. Jessica, do you remember this? The moment I saw the ring, old memories flooded back, and my heart fluttered slightly. How could I forget? This was the ring I had bought for him when he was seriously ill all those years ago. Seeing me lost in thought, a flicker of hope flashed in Anthony's eyes. I've kept this ring with me all this time, never once letting it leave me. Before he could finish, I took the ring from my hand and tossed it into the trash bin at my feet. Anthony snapped out of his daze, his face contorted in disbelief. He shouted at me, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Now, what are you doing? In contrast to his frantic reaction, I remained calm, responding in a detached tone, this is something. I bought it so I can throw it away whenever I want. What's the problem? But before I could finish my sentence, Anthony had already thrust his hand into the trash can, frantically rummaging through the garbage. He was a mess. His clothes were dirty, and the stench of refuse clung to him. Finally, when he found the ring, he gripped it as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. Trembling, he looked at me, his voice shaking with emotion. You really hate me this much? This was our 7th year. How can you just throw it all away like that? His words suggested I was cold and unfeeling, yet I didn't argue. Instead, I fully acknowledged it. Yes, that's exactly who I am. When my father died, my heart died with him. If it weren't for you, maybe my dad wouldn't have died. I'm not just indifferent to you. I hate you. With those words, Anthony collapsed onto the floor, completely broken. I turned to leave the room, my face showing no emotion. Just as I was about to step out, Anthony shouted, his voice strained with agony. But you still owe me so much. You have to stay with me. I order you to stay. His words were filled with pain, but I didn't flinch. I stopped for a moment, then pulled a card from my pocket, tossing it onto the floor in front of him. $1 million. Now, neither of us owes the other anything. We're done with this. I turned and walked away without another glance. The card was the one Eleanor had given me, the one I had kept with me, knowing this day would come. I had expected Anthony might try to use the money he paid for Benjamin's medical bills as leverage against me. Once outside the hospital, I finally allowed myself to relax. I looked up at the sky, the warm glow of the setting sun casting hues across the horizon, and smiled. Benjamin, do you think I look handsome? I whispered to the wind, as if sharing the moment with him. Everyone in the hospital had witnessed what had happened in the room. Anthony's reputation had taken a severe hit. Soon I heard rumors that he was planning to leave. He even sent me a letter, but before I could open it, something unexpected occurred. It was the weekend, and while I was resting, a child suddenly rushed into my dorm, stumbling and shaking. Jessica, my dad fell into the river gorge when he came home. I can't find him. What should I do? The moment he mentioned his father, my heart twisted with worry. I immediately comforted the child while calling the police. I didn't waste a second and followed the child, eager to find his father. But as soon as I stepped out of the dorm, a sharp blow struck the back of my neck. In an instant, I collapsed to the ground, unconscious. When I woke up, I found myself in a desolate, abandoned junkyard. My arms and legs were tightly bound to a chair with thick ropes. I furrowed my brow, trying to gather my bearings, and realized I wasn't alone. Next to me, bound just as tightly, was Anthony. It wasn't long before Anthony slowly regained consciousness. When he opened his eyes and saw the situation we were in, his first instinct was to look at me with a soft gaze. Jessica, I didn't expect that in the end. We'd die together, he said almost wistfully. I rolled my eyes, unimpressed. Before he could say anything else, a slender woman walked slowly toward us from the entrance of the junkyard. Her face twisted with malice, her eyes filled with venom as she glared at both Anthony and me. As soon as Anthony recognized her, he was the first to react. Eleanor, what the hell are you doing? Don't you know this is illegal? Let us go. But Eleanor seemed unfazed by his words. She approached holding a sharp knife and coldly pressed it to Anthony's face. Tell me, she sneered, how would you feel if this knife sliced into your face, one cut after another? Anthony immediately fell silent, too scared to respond. Meanwhile, I remained calm, looking at Eleanor. Eleanor, I haven't done anything to offend you, have I? Before I could finish, Eleanor shot me a venomous look and spat. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? You ruined my life. Her voice was laced with fury. On the day of the wedding, you were abandoned by your fiancé and went off to find another woman. What a joke, I replied calmly, still working on loosening the thick ropes binding me. But it was Anthony who left you, not me. If you're angry, you should be angry with him, not me. Before Eleanor could respond, Anthony, who had been stunned into silence by the earlier exchange, suddenly erupted in anger. Jessica, how can you say that? He shouted. I glared at him with contempt. Why can't I? I've hated you for a long time. At the sight of our argument, Eleanor grinned widely, clearly entertained by our exchange. Ah, look at that, she laughed. Two people who once loved each other, now fighting like this. It's too good to be true. She then brought the knife closer to my throat and immediately followed by pressing it to both of us. Now, you both have two choices, she said, her voice cold and mocking. One of you has to die. Her gaze shifted between me and Anthony, a cruel amusement flickering in her eyes. If we didn't make a choice soon, she'd kill both of us. No! Anthony shouted instinctively, his face slick with sweat, his body trembling in fear. Eleanor looked at him as if he were a mere clown, amusement dancing in her eyes. Oh, she said with a sneer. Looks like you've already made your choice, haven't you? Anthony shook his head, panic creeping into his voice. No. But the blade pressed closer, and I could feel Anthony's entire body shaking, still unwilling to decide. Eleanor taunted, but your actions have already made it clear. Her laughter echoed through the otherwise silent junkyard As she slowly turned the knife toward me, the sharp edge inched closer to my skin. Despite obviously being in pain, Anthony remained silent. His eyes locked on me, his expression tortured. Eleanor's voice came in a low whisper right by my ear. See? The man you love is so selfish. At that moment, Anthony slowly closed his eyes, seemingly resigned to his fate. Jessica, I'm sorry, he murmured. But before he could finish his apology, I quickly seized Eleanor's wrist, yanking the knife from her grip. In one smooth motion, I forced her into a hold, pressing her down onto the ground. For a brief moment, both Eleanor and Anthony were paralyzed with shock. When Eleanor snapped out of her daze, her face twisted with fury, and she began to yell at me. "If you hurt me, my father won't let you get away with this," she screamed. I smirked, unfazed, and teased, "Oh, really?" Then I bent down to pick up the knife that had fallen earlier, twirling it slowly in my hand with a gleam of amusement in my eyes as I moved closer to her. After Benjamin passed, I realized I had to depend on myself for everything, so I started boxing. It wasn't long before Eleanor completely broke down, tears pouring down her face. Desperately, she pleaded, "Jessica, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Please don't kill me." Seeing her makeup smudged by tears, I finally stopped smiling. I tucked the knife away and, in a calm and controlled tone, I said, "Don't worry, I won't hurt you. The real punishment will come from the police." As I finished speaking, the police arrived, and Eleanor was arrested for intentional harm. As for Anthony, they untied him, but he didn't dare approach me. I nodded in acknowledgement. "Yeah, I'm not angry. You're weak and cowardly. I've always known that." Hearing my words, Anthony lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "If I—" But I cut him off sharply. "There's no if," I replied. I pulled the letter from my pocket and handed it to him. "Here, take it. All those promises are meaningless." I had already read the letter, which was filled with declarations of love, promises to settle his marriage, and vows to return and find me. He even swore he would give up his life for me. As I held the letter in my hand, Anthony looked as though his very soul had been drained. I looked down at him, a sense of relief washing over me. I hadn't expected anything, so I wasn't disappointed. As I turned to leave, I heard a faint whisper on the wind. Sorry, but I didn't accept it. I walked out of the junkyard without looking back. From that day on, I never saw Anthony again. It was as if he had never existed in my life at all. I continued my work in Tennessee, treating the injured and saving lives. Time passed quickly. During this period, I did run into Eleanor again. She had been released from prison, but was no longer the same arrogant woman I'd known. Now she seemed subdued, no longer brash. When she saw me, she scurried away like a mouse trying to escape a cat. As for Anthony, I learned about him by chance through a friend. He was consumed with guilt and had fallen into depression.